Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to your flipped classroom, where we're going to pick up right where we left off talking about this crazy, tumultuous situation going on in England, right? And by the way, quick shout out, saw so many of y'all at open house. You absolutely killed it. I love the band performances. I love the tour guiding stuff. So many of y'all did so good. Huge shout outs like Olivia, Stella, I know I saw Rowan, Katie Tuttle, like all you guys doing their thing. Elizabeth Hamilton, I saw you doing as well, right? Okay, also like awesome in the bowling uniform, I loved it. And then, also, really big shout out to Erla, killing it in like cross country states and things like that is what I heard on the street. Very, very good job. But all you are doing so well, balancing all your outside stuff and your schoolwork. But let's pick right up where we left off talking about. So the thing about it, though, is we left off in our last class talking about, of course, the English Civil War, right? Talking about Oliver Cromwell deposing the monarchy and stuff like that, bringing about a Republican era of Rome that will be, or not Rome, what Republican era of Rome? There was a Republican era of Rome. That was my bad, though. Bringing about a Republican era of England, where basically England would go 11 straight years without having a king, which is absolutely bananas, right? Going, oh, and Gianna, it's a bad thing, right? Now, the thing about it, though, when we're looking at this, though, you have to understand that this is a very monumental moment in European history, right? For the very first time, a king has been deposed by his legislative body, and the people have gone against him, right? And so what is going on, though, is right where we left off in our last, lesson, we were talking about this whole thing. Yeesh. All right, so yeah, exactly. As you can see, Charles I is now dead, right? Like, oh my God, look at that noggin right there, right? Charles I is now dead. He has been executed out front of an entire huge massive crowd of people that were chanting for his doom and defeat, right? Charles, the King of England, has been executed by his own people. That's absolutely bananas. Funny little fact about it too, though, is he did have an out. Like, they gave him an out and they were like, hey, you can stay king if you just sign all this stuff and devolve your power. And he was like, I don't want to. And he ran off and tried to make an ally, like an alliance with the Scots, and then they turned him over again. And Charles I ends up dead, right? And also probably about like 8 or 9, 10 inches shorter, right? So going into it, though, as well, is the death of Charles I is a very massive moment because it is going to begin that period known as the Commonwealth, right? That 11 years with no king when Cromwell will be actually in power, okay? Now, the other big thing that you need to understand is that the English kind of actually celebrate this every single year, right? When they actually open Parliament every single year, the king has to, or queen has to sit next to the death warrant of Charles, which is posted directly next to their head while they're preparing to open Parliament, right? To serve as just a reminder right next to their face, being like, hey, remember what happened last time somebody tried to go against the Parliament? They ended up dead, right? So literally, the current King Charles, who is now King Charles III, when he opens Parliament, has to sit next to a death warrant of King Charles I. Absolutely bananas moment in history. It's going to set through a wave of different reactions and events, though, going forward that will phenomenally change everything going down in England in perpetuity for the rest of existence, right? Now, we talked about this a little bit already. This was already on your test. We talked about it some, and we got into the fact that Cromwell is now going to be the leader of England, right? Cromwell is going to begin this thing known as the Commonwealth period. The Commonwealth period is going to last, for those of you who like to be uber specific and have dates for things, the Commonwealth period is going to last from 1649 to 1660, okay? So 1649 to 1660 will be that 11 years with no monarch, which is actually very convenient because we also had a period of 11 years with just a monarch, right? When Charles I had his personal rulership. Now, of course, the best years of his life, where he had his kids and his wife and all that fun stuff. Well, going into it, though, as well, though, this 11 years is going to be dramatically different, okay? There's going to be no more kings. Cromwell will start a giant brigade, or not a brigade, but a giant rulership of closing bars and banning drinking and closing theaters and outlawing excessive jewelry and stuff like that. And he's even going to banish Catholics to Ireland. He is going to allow the Jewish people to come back to England, though, which is a phenomenal victory for the Jewish community in this sense, because they have literally just been pushed on, moved upon, and just absolutely blamed for all the hardships in Europe up to this point. They literally went through the Spanish Inquisition, and finally someone is allowing them some type of sovereignty and also some type of kindness, right? Thanks, Cromwell. You did one thing right, okay? Well, the big thing about it, though, is he banishes Catholics to Ireland as well. He also starts a giant campaign of, killing Irish or Catholic priests, hunting them down, having them executed and stuff like that, which leads a huge number of Catholic priests to go into hiding in England, right? Now, some of you are like, but Mr. Terry, wait a minute, I thought you couldn't be Catholic in the first place in England. Well, yeah, you couldn't be Catholic, but remember we talked about that whole at-home worship thing, right? Catholics were secretly at-home Catholics, right? Worshiping in quiet and stuff like that. And so literally, they actually had priests that lived with them, and they would shuffle them around through different houses and safe houses and stuff. And literally, literally stick them in basements of homes and these little holes called priest holes. There were false doors in the bottom of some like homes in England, especially in northern England, where Catholics were still kind of practicing in secret. They literally had these like holes in the bottom of their house where they would like lift up a fake bottom of like, or a fake floor, and it'd be a little hole, and you could see a priest in there and be like, hello, and it's basically like called a priest hole. That's literally what it was. And so he's going to banish Catholics to Ireland. He's going to start this massive campaign of just being a gigantic tool, right? Cromwell is awful. Cromwell is the worst. Nobody likes Cromwell. I personally hate Cromwell, right? Cromwell is a jerk. He is not nice. He also is not a very good leader in the sense of being good to other people. He's very narrow-minded. He's like all about power and stuff like that. Now, some people would say, well, he had a really good army, Mr. Terry, and he also gave solidarity to the English people after a very chaotic period of civil war. I mean, yeah, he did, but he also made life kind of like garbage. And he also represented the fringe community, right? So something you need to understand about Cromwell before he even comes to power, or when he comes to power, he represents extremism in England, right? Most people in England wanted to keep the monarchy. They had no desire to execute Charles and stuff like that. They were like, oh, we have a monarch, right? That is an English tradition. So when this guy starts up and he starts closing bars and closing theaters and outlawing playing cards and stuff like that, people start being like, this is not what we signed up for, right? And a lot of people even tried to reinstate the monarchy, right? The Scots, for example, were a really, really big one. The Scots actually recruit Charles's son, Charles Jr., to come back and become their king and be like, look, come back, become the king of the Scots, convert to Presbyterianism, and go off and fight Cromwell and retake the throne that is rightfully yours, right? And Cromwell even fought a massive war against Charles Jr., right? He literally fights a huge war against him, and Charles Jr. loses, right? That's the thing, is Oliver Cromwell's new model army is very strong, it's very aggressive, and it's a standing army. It's there ready to fight at any given drop of a hat. And the rump parliament that he actually rules with is the one that's closing everything down in England while he helps rule the army, right? So ironically enough, this bad time for everyone in England is a very strong period militarily for England, right? And this big war that he fights against Charles runs into hiding, right? Charles runs into hiding, he loses a massive war, and he loses a huge battle at this battle called Worcester or Worcestershire, or however the heck you say that word. And then this is going to lead to the dominance of Cromwell going into this time period. And another interesting thing about Oliver Cromwell is he kind of, shout out Roland for you, I know you really like a lot of the U.S. history stuff. Big thing is he kind of unintentionally started the American Revolution, right? 100 years before it ever even truly began. So, like, he actually enforced these early things known as the Navigation Acts, which actually came into power in 1651. And they were a direct set of trade laws that actually told the American colonists who they could and couldn't trade with, right? And the Navigation Act set certain limits saying that all goods that colonists ship and buy must be shipped on English vessels, right? They have to be moved on English vessels and cannot be moved on Dutch ones. Now, this was a really big moment in American colonial history because this is going to be the very first thing that angers the colonists, right? The colonists over in Boston and in Virginia and then now, like, also the growing ones in the South and then all the ones in the middle as well are starting to get really pissed off at Cromwell being like, bro, what do you mean I have to do all the stuff on English boats? You're more expensive. Like, the Dutch are giving me way cheaper goods for a way better price. Why don't you allow the market to fluctuate the way that it was? So this smells a little bit to me like Oliver Cromwell sounds a little bit like an absolutist, does he not? Right? Like, so he sounds a little bit like an absolutist due to the fact that, like, he's trying to invoke mercantilism, right? He's putting tariffs on things. He's trying to hoard money for the one country, right? Like, this is a really big deal. And so these navigation acts anger the colonists and kind of begin that resentment towards England and really kind of unintentionally start the entire revolutionary period, right? These navigation acts are very, very big because it's also going to set up a tense relationship between England and the Netherlands, right? Because basically England and the Netherlands, since Elizabeth has been in power, have been allies, right? Do you not remember in the 1580s whenever Elizabeth actually allied with the Dutch that were rebelling against the Spanish? Like, so the big thing about it, though, is they've been allies ever since then. Well, going into this point, Cromwell breaks that ally, right? Breaks that ally down and then says, oh, well, sorry, Dutch, you can be friends with us, but you can't sell stuff to our colonies. Like, what a turd, right? Like, what an absolute jerk. And so going into it as well, he then banned Christmas and Halloween. At one point, there's a traditional legend that goes around that Oliver Cromwell banned mincemeat pies, which is a delicacy of English people, right? He banned Christmas because he didn't like how much celebration was happening before the actual Mass Day, right? He hated that part, and he was like, oh, the drinking's got to stop. He banned Halloween because he thought it was the devil's day and stuff like that, even though ironically enough, it was supposed to be the day that came before like, All Saints Day, like All Hallows Eve, right? Like, so now he also fined people for swearing. Well, you know what, Cromwell? You know what I think about you? I think you're a huge jerk, and you're the biggest piece of I've ever heard of in my entire existence. Maybe you should get the out of here and let the English people do whatever they want. Yeah. How you like me now, bro? So yeah, now look. So the big thing about it, though, is I just got fined a lot, probably. Now, looking at the entire thing, though, as well, I didn't actually say it. I just bleeped it. Now, the big thing about, though, looking at it as well, when you're talking about it, he even had children whipped in the streets for playing on Sundays. I don't know what a Sundayers is, but that was my fault. That's a typo. If they were caught, playing football on a Sunday, or if they were caught playing with toys on a Sunday, children would be beaten, right? Whipped. They get, whoopings and stuff like that publicly in English towns because of the different things that he actually regulated. Women who wore too much jewelry or dressed too extravagantly would also be punished as well. Cromwell, you are such a huge jerk. All right, so, now going into it as well, though, obviously, he's creating some disdain, right? But then the weirdest thing comes around. And a lot of these new political philosophers coming up start kind of idealizing him, we think, maybe, possibly. So a good thing that you need to understand, though, is this is the kind of the spark that leads to this period known as the Enlightenment, right? So the Enlightenment is going to be a big thing that's happening. And all the while during this time period, the scientific revolution is happening in the background as well. But the Enlightenment begins to be a questioning of political authority, right? And some of the earliest Enlightenment thinkers are all coming out of England during the Commonwealth period. And the first one is a guy by the name of Thomas Hobbes, right? Thomas Hobbes kind of these are how the absolutist era and the Enlightenment period are kind of related to one another. Because during the Commonwealth period, Thomas Hobbes actually writes a very famous book that you interacted with on your last test because there was an excerpt from it. And that book was called The Leviathan, right? Now, The Leviathan is a book by Thomas Hobbes, and Thomas Hobbes is that very first Enlightenment political philosopher, okay? The Leviathan is a very, very interesting book as well. Because really quickly, let's break down what a Leviathan is before we go any further, okay? What a Leviathan is it is a Greek beast of myth, right? It's this giant creature that is faceless and destroys ships and people and cities and villages, and it has no real qualities in and of itself, right? It doesn't have a face or an image or whatever, but it just represents a monster, right? A disgusting, grotesque, gross entity that will destroy society in and of itself, right? If you allow it, unless a hero comes along and slays it. Now, the interesting thing about it is whenever I'm talking about this, some of you are probably wait a minute, is the Leviathan Cromwell? Is he the Leviathan? Because he's gross and nobody likes him. Well, here's the weird thing. Thomas Hobbes did not think Cromwell was the Leviathan. Thomas Hobbes thought you were the Leviathan. He thought you were the bad guy, right? Thomas Hobbes basically thought that all people are disgusting and awful and left up to their own devices will murder and kill each other for it, one scrap of food or one piece of land. So the big thing about it is Thomas Hobbes is actually not advocating for the Parliament. He's advocating for an absolutist. He's saying that, the hero of our story is an absolutist that comes along to slay the disgusting Leviathan and bring the people underneath his quartership. Look at the cover of the Leviathan. Literally, the king is made up of his people, right? And he is godlike and humongous. And so Thomas Hobbes is so this is the big thing. You need a benevolent absolutist. He takes Machiavelli into a whole new level, right? And he's you need an absolutist to protect you from yourself because y'all are just going to kill and stab each other over the last cheeseburger if the zombie apocalypse happens. Which here's the worst part about it. I don't think Thomas Hobbes is wrong. I do kind of actually agree with that part of it, that human beings can be disgusting and whatever. But at the same time, I also don't like absolutists because we all know what happens when a person gets power, right? So the thing about it, though, is with the Enlightenment beginning during the Commonwealth period under Cromwell's rulership through Thomas Hobbes, he is also going to bring to corner this very big concept known as the social contract that you need to highlight, underline, circle it, make it in red. It's very important, okay? The social contract is basically what Hobbes came up with. Where let's talk about what a contract is before we go any further. A contract is basically a quid pro quo. It's I'm going to do this and you're going to do this kind of setup, right? And if you violate this, then I will violate you back using this, right? So the thing about it, though, with the social contract is Thomas Hobbes invents this concept where he believed that people, you, me, all of us, had to give up certain rights to a benevolent absolutist to protect us from ourselves, right? That we have to give up the right of freedom of speech, that we have to give up the right of this, have to give up the right of freedom of religion and things like that to an absolutist who will just protect us from ourselves, right? That's the contract. I'm giving up this, but you must protect me, right? So this is a very warped perspective on reality. And the interesting thing is it's so warped, in fact, that many historians have disagreed on if Thomas Hobbes actually liked Cromwell or disliked Cromwell. Nobody's really that positive. We do think that Thomas Hobbes, though, did share some puritanical ideas. Of course, looking at his outfit and his attire, the black and the white and the simple expose of like what he's looking for, and he's not like gaudy and like very noble or very cavalier in a sense. But the thing about it at the same time is some political historians have argued that he thought that the Republican system under Cromwell was bad, and some political historians have actually argued that he thought it was good. But the big thing you need to know is that the big rock has just hit the still water of political philosophy, and the Enlightenment is beginning, okay? So keep that in the back of your mind, all right? We're now going to deal with a lot of big ripples coming off of that big event a little bit later on. But going into it, though, Oliver Cromwell still in power, right? And the thing about it is he is underneath his rump parliament, right? Funny thing about it is that the rump parliament was the one that actually started a lot of the banning and the outlawing of all the things in England, right? Bars, theaters, like Christmas, Halloween, all that stuff was being banned underneath the rump parliament until a lot of them started looking around and being like, this doesn't seem like a great idea anymore. We think that we're letting this guy get a little bit too carried away. And so Oliver Cromwell actually decides to dissolve the rump parliament in 1653, and he's like, you know what, I can't even trust my own parliament anymore. And he creates this thing known as the Protectorate, right? He abolishes the rump parliament, and he brings in a military dictatorship underneath himself, right? A military dictatorship where he then creates himself known as the Lord Protector and divided England into 12 military districts that was ruled over by martial law, right? Yeah, Oliver, you sound like an absolute jerk right now. You sound absolute jerk. Now, the thing about it, though, in general, is that also, Oliver, you're a king in everything but name, right? You're a king in every way, in every matter, and you're also way worse than the kings that have come before you. You are more of an absolutist than Charles I ever even got close to, right? Because you're suppressing the rights and things of people in general. And also, it's so funny because we see imagery of Oliver Cromwell also appearing and looking as though he's absolutist or against or actually a part of the things that he hated. So these right here are the royal wax seals of the actual like Charles I and then Oliver Cromwell later. What's the difference here, y'all? What's the difference? Charles I's horse just happens to be running with a greyhound by its side on a royal hunt and he's wearing armor, but this one's just Oliver Cromwell on a horse that's not running. Like, that is absolutely ridiculous. Oliver Cromwell is way worse than any of the Stuart monarchs that came before him. James just got picked on and made fun of and tried to outlaw tobacco once, and it didn't even work. Charles literally just tried to dissolve the parliament a bunch of times and was a huge turd and definitely, like, taxed people unfairly, but, you know, like, he could have figured something out. This guy's, like, banning everything you love. You know what I mean? Like, he's a huge tool bag, and nobody likes him. And you know what? The best thing that could have happened is he died in 1660, right? So Oliver Cromwell dies in 1660 or 1659, one of those two. I'll have to go look it up. But the big thing about it, though, in general is, wait, we'll just look it up right now. Hey, Siri, when did Oliver Cromwell die? 1658. All right, so now, anyway, end of 1658 anyway, going into 1659. But the thing about it, though, is the Commonwealth period does not end until 1660. So who took over after that? Who took over after Cromwell died? What ended up happening? Well, they had a very large funeral for him, and they buried him inside of the wall of a church and stuff like that, and his son, Richard Cromwell, takes over. Yet again, I feel we have an issue here. Yeah, smells a lot like a monarch to me if your son's taking over, right? Except here's the big thing you need to understand. His son was very inept and unable to rule over the protectorate system that his father had actually created. And his name was Richard Cromwell. But he was so weak, in fact, that he lost rulership of England to someone else because he was weak, ineffective, and unable to keep his power up high. So basically the English gave him a new nickname, and they called him, because he fell from power, they called him Tumble Down Dick. I know. So the thing about it, though, in general, is who is the guy that replaces him? So if if Richard Cromwell, the son of Oliver Cromwell, is so weak and ineffective, who's going to replace him then? Who comes to power after that? Well, we've got the Restoration period. That's right! England's going to bring the Stuarts back again. They actually decided after the weak protectorate failed following Cromwell's death that they would bring back the old English government. The Parliament was like, okay, look, y'all, we made a mistake. We bet on the wrong horse. We went with speaking of horses, Oliver Cromwell banned horse racing as well. He also banned like all kinds of other stuff, anything revolving around gambling. And so like he was like, they were like, we bet on the wrong horse, no pun intended. We went with this Cromwell guy and we really shouldn't have, right? And in 1660, they decided, let's bring the monarchs back, right? Let's do what the people of England always wanted to do, and let's get the monarchs back in here and stuff like that. And so who do they turn to but Charles II? The son of Charles I, who's been in hiding in France and stuff like that ever since he lost that war to Oliver Cromwell, right? So the thing about it is they decide to coronate and bring back Charles II, the very famous king of France, who is very important, okay? So Charles II has, though, gone through a lot of different stuff, right? And something you need to understand about it, though, is when he landed back in England after having been on the run and after actually to hide in people's houses and after losing a war to Cromwell and stuff like that. A lot of different things had happened to him that had really affected his personality. But when he came back to England and was actually coronated as the new king and stuff like that, people loved him. They were like super excited. They referred to him as the Merry Monarch. And then also in the long run, they also did this as well, which is really funny. And they had a nickname for him.
My name is Charles II.
Oh, hail the King of Bling. Let's sing, bells ring, ding ding.
I'm the king who brought back partying. King.
Exactly. He's the king that brought back partying, right? So the funniest thing about it is Charles was very well known for his party habits, right? So when he came back to power, he rolled back all of the reforms that actually Cromwell did. But before we get into that whole thing, let's make sure we talk about his backstory a little bit so you can understand what his big effects on the English government is going to be from a personal perspective, right? Let's humanize this guy a little bit. Let's make him seem like a real person that you could sit down and talk with. Well, first and foremost, Charles's backstory, he spent most of his youth with his mom, right? They were mostly in exile, bouncing around the Netherlands and France and stuff like that, while Charles I, his dad, was actually trying to fight the wars of the English civil wars against Oliver Cromwell, right? The big thing also that you need to understand is that after the death of his father happens and stuff like that, he ends up bouncing around through more other areas and court parties and stuff like that, and would eventually, of course, come back as the King of Scotland, right? 1 week after his father's execution. Well, by that point in time, Charles II was very well known for being addicted to a couple of things. Women and tennis, right? Like, so he loved playing royal tennis. It was his favorite game to play, and he was all about some women, y'all. I don't think you understand. The man literally had 12 illegitimate children, none of them with his wife, right? He had 12 kids, none with his actual wife. He had mistresses out the yin-yang. He would have very debaucherous parties where there was drinking and other things going on and all this other crazy stuff. But that's the thing, is like the English didn't care by this point because they had lived such an oppressive life underneath Cromwell, right? This merry monarch, this king that brings back partying, everybody gets real jazzed up about it and stuff like that. And also, funny little thing about it too is Charles has something named after him because he actually had a certain breed of dog like bred for him. That's right, if you've ever seen these guys before, those are the King Charles Cavalier Spaniels, right? Get it? Cavalier Spaniel, of course, named after him and his father's army and stuff like that. And they called him that because of the big, like, ears and stuff like that that matched the hair that Charles had, right? So the thing about it, though, in general, is that throughout most of his life, while he's partying, he's playing tennis, he's trying to stay alive, he becomes King of Scotland, and then he goes into hiding and stuff like that. When he was in hiding, this is very important that we understand this. He had failed to actually take the throne back from Cromwell in the Third English Civil War. He became the King of Scotland for a brief amount of time before Cromwell goes and takes it all over after he wins the Third English Civil War against him. But a very important moment happened in Charles's life, right? He was actually on the run trying to get out of England without being caught by Cromwell's troops. And where does he end up? But in a priest hole, right? He ends up being hidden by a secret Catholic family and stuff like that in Wales, and they hide him down in their basement with another Catholic priest, right? Now, Charles himself is not a Catholic priest, but he sits down there with him, and he ends up making very good friends with this Catholic priest. And while he's down there, this Catholic priest, counsels him, talks to him, and gives him things to read and stuff like that. And that was at that point that Charles began to entertain the idea of secretly converting to Catholicism, right? So Charles, never being baptized as a Catholic, does in his heart secretly convert to Catholicism, right? Which is a really big deal because following the death of Cromwell, he was brought back as king by popular demand, right? So we now have currently a partying, not getting anyone that's his wife pregnant, interesting little dude coming into power, and everybody loves him. So a very interesting situation is sitting on the crown right now, right? And then well, not sitting on the crown is sitting on him. And then also, there's a lot of crazy things that happened underneath the early things of his reign. Like underneath the earliest part of his reign, in 1660, on the anniversary of his father's death, he actually decided to have all the people that executed his father dug up out of their graves and put on trial, and then he had them executed as well. And one of those guys included Oliver Cromwell himself. That's right, Charles II, when he came back to power in England and stuff like that. First of all, he's not even married yet, but he's got a bunch of illegitimate kids running around and stuff like that. Literally has Oliver Cromwell's body dug up, and they swing an axe at it 8 different times. They chop the head off, and they put it on top of a 20-foot spike, and they hang it over top of the Westminster Hall, right? And so literally, Oliver Cromwell's head got paraded through the streets of like England, like it was a big banner or something like that. And it sat up there for over 100 years until then it was later actually stolen by somebody else, and to this day we have no idea where it is. Oliver Cromwell's head is long gone and lost, and so we have no clue where it actually went. But I just love the idea that they dug him up and they were like, you killed Charles, we're gonna get you. And so going into it though as well, you have to understand that going on in his entire regency and stuff like that, he does get married, right? So Charles actually, even though his early reign is fraught with like a bunch of challenges and stuff like that, he has like Oliver Cromwell's head broken off his shoulders and chased around like the entire like city and stuff like that. Something else that you need to understand about him is that he does get married, and he gets married to a Catholic woman. And so I believe her name's it's either Catherine or Isabel. What's her name? So Charles the second wife. Catherine of Braganza, yeah. A noble woman from Portugal, right? And the funny thing about it is she was disgusted with him, right? She got married to him thinking, oh, we will have children, I will become the Queen of England and stuff like that. But she actually didn't even live in England for more than like 6 months because she was absolutely disgusted with how Charles acted, right? With all these mistresses, and he dated actresses and stuff like that. Charles apparently really loved to date actresses. One in particular named Nell that he was like all about. And he had all these kids with them and stuff like that. And so she refused to get divorced from him because she was Catholic and Charles is secretly Catholic, and we all know that like, you know, how the whole like not getting a divorce in Catholicism works. And so the big thing about it is she moves back to Portugal. So he never has kids with her. So who is going to actually leave to open the throne up to is the heir to the throne is now going to be James, his brother. Like, so now the thing about it though is, and also his early reign was fraught with challenges in a big way. In 1665, when he came to power, there was a massive outbreak of the plague, right? He comes to power in 1660, but within the first 5 years of his reign, like a plague outbreak actually hits London. The bubonic plague came back for like a period of time, and 7,000 people were dying every single week in this process, right? You had literally streets and carts full of dead bodies being brought out, homes being burned where they were trying to actually keep the plague under control and stuff like that. Now, an interesting little fact about this, though, too, is there was a very, very important figure that was actually alive during this plague outbreak, and his name was none other than, no, that's not me, like Sir Isaac Newton, right? Sir Isaac Newton was actually alive during that plague outbreak, and he actually moved out to his country home and estate whenever actually the plague was going on in London to avoid getting the plague, so he moved out to the countryside, and it was on this countryside estate that his family had an apple orchard, right? And on that apple orchard, apparently he saw an apple fall, and that led to his entire theories of gravity popping up. So the thing about it, though, in general, we'll talk more about that story a little bit later on and how basically that never happened and how he actually just used it as a way to explain gravity to stupid people. But the thing about it is, like I said, in the background, we got a scientific revolution that's occurring all the while the era of absolutism's happening, right? So really, really quick, though, we also have another one, too. The Great Fire of London, which actually Isaac Newton thought was the end of days. Isaac Newton literally thought that 1666 was going to be the end of the world because of the 666. And so the thing about it, though, he was very pious and super Catholic and stuff like that. He never got married. We actually think he might have died a virgin. Now, the thing about it, though, in general, though, in 1666, the Great Fire of London breaks out and destroyed 13,000 homes and 87 different churches because most of the city was still built out of wood at the time. And it was very windy during this time period, and it was a large period without rain that came beforehand, so the city was super dried out. Now, the crazy thing about it, though, is the Great Fire of London was immediately blamed on Catholics, right? They were like, oh, the Catholics actually started all these fires and it burnt down most of our city and all this property damage and stuff like that. And actually so many different things were destroyed. One man was falsely hung for this, but ironically enough, he didn't even start it. The entire thing started at a bakery on a place literally called Pudding Lane. So it's so funny and so English. A bakery started the Great Fire of London on Pudding Lane. But as you can see, Charles's early reign is fraught with a lot of different issues, right? The Anglo-Dutch wars are going to bring out. That's right. We've got some wars between England and the Netherlands. Netherlands due to the fact that the Navigation Acts were passed under Cromwell and tensions had began to grow between the Dutch and the English, right? And then we also have some other crazy stuff going on during his entire thing. Big thing is the English actually lose some of these early Anglo-Dutch wars, right? And get embarrassed by them. And then actually, at one point, De Ruyter, the Dutch admiral, even takes and tows away the ship that's named after Charles, that is the flagship of the British Navy, right? And so with that, though, Charles then enters into a secret alliance with his cousin, Louis the 14th. I know. And the entire thing enters into this alliance just so he can help him actually defeat some of the Dutch in some of these battles and stuff like that. But Louis has some issues with the way that things are going down in England. And Louis demands that if he's going to aid England in the Third Anglo-Dutch War to try and take away some actual Dutch rights and Dutch things and stuff like that, he refuses to actually help him unless Charles makes him a couple of promises, right? Now, Charles is entering into a negotiation with the biggest absolutist that Europe has ever seen, right? So with the guy, the Sun King himself and stuff like that, who lives in Versailles and rules completely and absolutely from the Hall of Mirrors, right? And the issue with this alliance is the promises that he forced Charles to take, right? And he told him that you must secretly convert, or no, excuse me, let me rephrase. You must convert to Catholicism publicly. And you must lift some of the issues and some of the intolerant laws that are on Catholics in general. And I'll pay you, right? So basically the alliance was like this. Louis agreed to give him a royal allowance and give him money, right? So he could not have as many issues with Parliament. He also agreed to to this alliance if he publicly converted to Catholicism and if he lifted some of the restrictions on Catholics in England, right? But the problem is that Charles needed more money to fight these Anglo-Dutch wars. Charles had actually dissolved Parliament at one point during his reign and stuff like that. And when he brings them back, Parliament says, nope, we feel as though you're starting to be too lenient on these Catholics. And remember, Charles was secretly a Catholic himself. And so they were actually so we're going to sign a different document that says actually that no other Catholic can actually serve in the government. And this document was called the Test Act, right? And the Test Act was actually passed by Parliament that barred anyone from Parliament or public service that was a Catholic at all, because they would test you to see if you actually were a Catholic. This destroyed Charles emotionally, right? Charles emotionally starts going through a lot of really difficult moments because he can't hold up the alliance he has now just promised with his cousin. He is wasting the money that he's getting in this royal allowance. He tried to pass laws that would allow Catholics to publicly worship in England, and it failed miserably. And so literally he feels inadequate. He doesn't have an heir to the throne. He's all obsessed with his mistresses, and no amount of royal tennis could make him feel much better. And he died in 1685 while grappling with a lot of these different issues and things like that. And we'll actually pick up on England and the history of England after his death, following all this stuff when I see you in class next. Now, make sure you read the Google Classroom, though, because y'all got to do a DBQ outline and grade 2 DBQs for a quiz grade that'll be due on the day we get back. Wait, hold on. Sorry about that. The DBQ grade and outline is going to be due the morning y'all come back. So I need it by Wednesday at 8 a.m. All right? Wednesday at 8 a.m. I need those Google forms filled out for your quiz grade to be put in, okay? Got it? Thank y'all. Y'all have a great one. I'll see y'all soon.